Hello, I've been running, and the name Brian Lewis popped into my head. Who is Brian Lewis?
More than the Brian Lewis that is known as immediate past president of the TTOC, immediate past president of Canal Caribbean Association of NOC's National Olympic Committee's current Secretary General of Canal, co-chair of Gender, Race, Inclusion and Diversity. Those are the titles. Who is Brian Lewis? Brian Lewis is a boy who grew up single parent in Bedford Lane, Belmont, and grew up at a time when social activism culture um, was important. So his influences have been shaped by that, his commitment to making a positive difference, I would say, through sports, the Olympic movement, and this life being a good example. My family, my children, those who I mentor, and the insurance industry that I've served for going on 40 years.
So, Brian Lewis is someone whose life has been dedicated to improving our country via sports. So, if you had a dream, what would you like to see happening in sports?
From a personal perspective, as I say now, growing up single parent without a father around, in Belmont at the time, where the father figures were either the community leaders or those involved in sports. Sports became, in essence, a surrogate father for me. And while others maybe branding you because you're from Belmont, at the time, Belmont, growing up wasn't considered middle class. Sport gave me a certain amount of self-esteem because you can do something good in sport while at the same time teachers may be saying that because you're not academically inclined or you're from Belmont, maybe you shouldn't be in a particular school, gotta go and learn trade. I passed from Belmont Boys RC to Fatima College. For me, sport has always had a more intangible power than the tangible power. And that has basically driven me, given the opportunity to have found myself accidentally in leadership position. I have always been more dedicated to using the platform to make changes and to clear a pathway that may not have existed. Now, it sounds a bit philosophical and abstract and even esoteric, but it is what has defined me in terms of some of the issues that I have taken on, even though misunderstood at the time that I met it. There are those who may say differently, and that's their right, but I don't believe I'm cut from the same cloth that many sports administrators and sport leaders have been cut from, in terms of whether they start with good intentions and then they get consumed by the reality of what is day-to-day sport politics.
Tell me about day to day sport politics. What are you referring to there?
Well, first off, there's politics in everything. But I've said for many years, sport politics is a brutal contact sport, especially when, in fact, in Trinidad and Tobago, and I dare say the Caribbean, it is really kindergarten. But when you step outside in where the difference is really made, brutal game in the sense that it is easy to be erased and made invisible. And then where silence becomes more important than truth. And many people don't see that. What they see is on the surface. To really get meaningful change, it requires a commitment to truth and what one may identify as justice. Other than that, you get consumed by the status, power, perception of control, and the perks, whatever you may deem that perks to be. And then self-interest becomes the default rather than using the platform and the position to make change.
So, Brian, if you were the Minister of Sports, what would you do?
I think the Minister of Sport, any Minister of Sport, their priority is the reality of the politics of the day. And the reality of politics, it's about gaining power and getting re-elected. So many times, the kind of change that needs to be done is constrained by the realities of the political obligations and the status and social obligations that inform the parameter. So a minister of sport will always be constrained by the government that they serve and the policies of that government and the strictures of public sector and the reality of public sector. So a minister may say they want to have a program somewhere, but it's not like in private sector where you control the levers of resources. You have to turn that to the public sector. They have to create a policy. You then have to take that policy to cabinet, and then you have to get it approved, and then you have to get it implemented and manage the various and diverse agendas and self-interest. I do not envy any minister of sport, regardless of their political persuasion.
So, Brian, what I'm hearing you say is that every 5 years we have a transformation of what we need to do in sports. I don't know if that's going to work for us. What are your thoughts on that?
It works for us in as far as we have gotten facilities. It works for us in so far as funding is made available within the guidelines and the policy guidelines of the day. But at the end of the day, a minister of sport will always be constrained by the political realities of the day and the competing interests. And that's why I've always held the belief Ministry of Sport is a facilitator, and that the real movement for change needs to happen from the ground up. Now that's a cliche, but what I mean by that, it has to happen in the national sporting organization, the community sporting, the ground. Because at the end of the day, if you want to use a marketing term, the distribution channel for sport and any sport, whether it is organized sport, physical activity, recreation, occurs via the people. But as I said, the reality of it is that there are so many competing interests, whether it is government, whether it is in the case of the Olympic movement, the IOC, in the case of football, it's FIFA, track and field is World Athletics. And invariably, the role of sport at the grassroots level, the ground level, becomes a means to an end rather than the end itself. And I think that's where many of us who are well-intentioned struggle. And for the majority of us, we become consumed by that reality. Because at the end of the day, the challenges are such that it forces self-interest to come to the top of the table.
Brian, this conversation is not inspiring to me. It's telling me that nothing is going to change. What would you do to change our approach to sports?
What has inspired me over the years is the commitment to fight for change. It is not something that I believe you could necessarily look at purely from your lens as a sports leader. You have to understand first, and the sad truth is, many of us understood it because we passed through it. But as I said, the maintenance of the status quo, many people who are well-meaning, they're in academia, they have all these brilliant theories. But when they get into the reality of it, the easiest thing to do is to say, you know what, I'll take the perception of whatever it is. Because Denise, at the end of the day, I can speak from personal experiences. Many of the causes that and the change that I have fought for have had a significant consequence in the sense that I'm viewed as a troublemaker, um, even from within TTOC, even within Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I remember when I was advocating for the rescinding of the unfair and unjust life ban of the Black American. I have it as something I've never lost because I don't have a disappearing message. I've always had it in case I wanted to write something, whoever it may be, whether it's a memoir, whether it's from messages from colleagues telling me, you got to shut up because you're causing problem, right? The IOC not happy and all of that. And it takes a measure of commitment to face that fire. And not many people wish to face that fire because the risk of being erased is very high. Now, maybe even the public to extent may not see it, they may believe, I'm not saying this in a negative way, from an idealistic way, but it's real. So to answer your question, I do believe, and there have been many changes over the years, whether we agree with it or not, so that change is not an impossibility. The challenge is in staying the course to be a catalyst of that change. And only today I was discussing with a friend from international, and we were discussing the fact that leadership and our concept of leadership is planting seeds, knowing and having no expectation that you'll be able to sit down under these trees that will be created. And that is, to me, is the primary purpose in when any change you want. You have to be able to see 30, 40, 50, 75 years down the road and be committed to it. But we live in a short-term era. It's either the next 5 years, the next 4 years, tomorrow, yes, and that in my mind is the biggest obstacle to change. I don't think that you should be demotivated by it because Denise, I have watched you from afar. We have not always been on the same page. But one thing I have never doubted and I've always respected is your commitment to the change that you believe needs to be made. And it has been a long journey. And there are very many times when you reflect, especially when you're facing personal and individual challenges, whatever they may be. There is always this little voice in your head that tells you, you're wasting your time because nothing has changed. But that's not true.
So, Brian, as we come to an end, what is the key message that you want our listeners to remember?
That change is not a destination, it's a journey. And that leaving your sport, the country, your community, a better place than you have found it is always an important purpose. While the establishment of my colleagues in leadership, only today I was talking to a young Afro-Trinbagonian female lawyer who's involved in sport. And she was telling me that she will never forget that when nobody else saw her, I saw her. I have had the same messages from young men and women, people who have gone to jail and have quietly mentored. So I know, and I will tell anybody, that the change is not about you. The change is the lives that you have positively impacted, who will continue to pay it forward. Change is important. Sport is one of the most important human endeavors, and it is part of us. It is part of our humanity, and it is always worth the effort.
Thank you ever so much, Brian.